everyone for this wonderful opportunity. And before I get started, I just want to say thank you everyone that actually answered a lot of my emails and questions and lots of back and forth on data. Without your effort, this study wouldn't be possible and all of the other work that we have done. The objective of the study is to understanding the structure, dynamic, and socio-economic dimensions of the secondhand clothing in Guatemala. So before we get started, I just want everyone to understand the economics of Guatemala. So Guatemala has the largest economy in Central America with an estimation population of 17.6 million, and about the 71.1% of the employed population works in actually the informal market. As you can see that the daily average income is about $2.68. And in 2023, according to Mercy Corp, it was that 55% of the population lived in poverty, with multi-dimensional poverty affecting 61.1% of the population. So because of this, it indicated that actually affordable clothing is really essential for the population living there. In Guatemala, secondhand clothing is what we call pacas, as many of you know. They also call it ropa americana. And retail shops and distribution centers are really essential to distribute the clothing to the entire country. And as of 2023, Guatemala imports 131.25 million kilograms of the clothing, with United States as the dominant supplier. Interestingly enough, we want to take a step back and just understanding the demand of clothing actually in Guatemala. As you can see in both charts, there's actually new clothing importation and used clothing importation are both increasing. So I'm going to talk to you about the 2019 data. For secondhand clothing, in 2019, it imported about 99.1 million kilograms, and new clothing was sitting at 68.2 million kilograms. In 2023, what we observed was that in Guatemala, there was a 41% increase of used clothing to 121.2 million, as new clothing also have a 41.2% increase to 96.9 million. And this is really important for us to understand, is that means that the market has a demand for clothing in general. And what was really differentiating between the two markets was that the CIF value for secondhand clothing sits at $1.62 per kg for used clothing, but whereas for new clothing it's about $6.52 per kg. So what this data is showing us is that it actually perhaps target a complete different markets. It also shows us that there's actually an increase in economics in Guatemala, that there is a demand for higher value clothing, and that also, secondhand clothing provides a really important affordability options for most of the population. So as most of you probably know, is that Guatemala has retail chains in both urban and rural areas, and clothing typically get imported by importers, what they call credential, and sometimes they also have clasificados, and obviously they also have the institutional rags from the US. From the sorters that we talk to and the importers, most of them actually import credential clothing, and they either have two kind of business operations. Out of the 7 importers and wholesalers, 4 of them actually import and sort the clothes in-house, and they supply it to their own retail shops. And the other 3 of them actually just directly distribute the clothing into the markets themselves. So the first model we're going to talk about is the retailers. They obviously have the formal and the informal markets. That's what we consider. They have 2 ways of operating. So the first model is they segment into premium or standard, targeting different customer segmentation. Premium store typically offer a higher quality clothing, while standard is more general inventory restock. So they would kind of have it in the first premium shops, and once it's finished, it was shifted into the next shop. In contrast, the second model, amplified by Megapaca, Mario, they don't actually adopt this approach. So what they do is they discount it because the market actually determines the price. The buyers determine the price. So it becomes a treasure hunt when you go inside, which is definitely true when I go into their shop. To look for the items that you really want. It makes it fun and interactive. So then now, once it gets sold into the formal retail, what we call is the top range pricing, middle range pricing, which is determined typically by the market. As you said, it gets discounted and go down. And what is the last sellable item in terms of pricing, what they call is saldos, and often either it goes back into the sorting facility, gets sorted again, or gets compacted and gets sold into the informal market also. So informal markets typically buy, credential, or they buy clasificados. A lot of them focuses on saldos. An important definition, what we call retailers are people who buys the bales, and then vendors are the ones that buy pieces. So they buy a single piece and they sell the single piece. And so now we actually survey the 4 markets in Guatemala. So the 4 markets we survey took in place in February and March in this year, and we conducted over 382 surveys. Out of the people who have responded in 382 of them, 75% are retailers and 25% are vendors. And this taken place in La Guardia, San Martin, La Maya, and El Terminal. And so the purpose of this, we also wanted to understand the quality perception by the end market. This ties into our research in East Africa. So we asked them, what does grade A mean, grade B mean in East Africa? Here the market was a little bit different, but what we noticed was that what they qualify as quality was actually the same in this market because sorting is actually relatively similar. So the first definition that we looked at was the characteristic of appearance. What we say appearance means the coloring of the clothing. So appearance is quite important, along with condition, which is the physical state. Fashion and trends are third, which is a bit more subjective. And the fourth one is functionality. That just looks at whether your zippers are there, your buttons are there. And last one we wanted to know is, do you care about if the clothes actually last? So we took the same methodology from East Africa and we applied it to see, would it work in Central America? What do the traders actually say? Clasificado and ropa crude, what clasificado is obviously what it means is sorted clothing. Ropa crude meaning the credential. And so we looked at the comparison, we asked them and say, what do you think of what is the grading? 5 is the highest, 1 is the lowest. The clothing, they said that classification typically have a higher grading compared to ropa crude because it's already sorted. And whereas ropa crude is often viewed as a lower quality, but it has a proportion also of higher items also. The top pricing, the middle pricing, there's a similar proportion. And so when we actually plotted statistical maps, I forgot what the exact term is that what we found was that they actually have a comparable average quality when we look at the top pricing and the middle range pricing when it comes to grading. Whereas saldos actually exhibit a lower pricing, as you can see that saldos actually is compared as a lower quality overall in terms of rating. So we also then asked them and say, okay, what is saldos compared to textile waste? I think that's a topic that has been resonating in the trade. And what we found was that textile waste, according to the traders, actually the appearance and the condition is what it separates them. And this is really important because it confirms our study in East Africa that appearance and condition are the most important thing for them when they look at the quality of clothing. So that means the coloring and the shape of the clothing. And so this confirms that actually the perceived quality is relatively similar. Now we ask them and say, okay, so based on this, how much of it actually are waste when you have these different knapsack of clothing? And what was found is that overall market, when we distribute all the clothing in terms of clasificado and also ropa crude and also saldos all together, we found that the percentage of waste is actually 9.2%, what they consider as waste, which is still significantly lower than what we would consider in the US when they collected the clothes and they sent from retail shops, right? And what we did was that we also divided down, if you can see that, into different clothing and seeing the percentage and distribution of clothing waste. And what we found was that the clasificado actually has the lowest percentage of waste, which is about 5%, which makes sense because most of the clothes, the waste are already sorted out, isn't it, in the sorting facility. And we suspect that it probably is sorting error and probably a different in value proposition perceived by the market. And what we found in East Africa was that the percentage of waste is typically lower than 5%, about 1% there. But there's about 3% of rags. So this is kind of relatively similar when it comes to that. As you can see that classificado does not contain any rags. Now, when we look at Ropa Cru, which is the credential, they said that about 12.12% of it is actually perceived as no value to the market. And this definition is established by GIZ. So that means that you don't have any buyers for that product. And what was interesting was that Saldos has 11.1% of waste. So that means that actually overall market is about 9.2, which is a decent number. So now we looked at what does that mean actually for the traders who are working in industry. Who are they? Are they male? Are they female? And what we found was that actually 60.7% are female and 39.3% are male. Among the 136 identified business owners, majority are actually women. This industry actually provides a large proportion of the informal market, with 57.4% being women and 42.6% being men. And this compared to the national statistic is typically 27% of women are business owners. So that shows that this industry provides opportunity for women to have their own ownership. When we look at how does that play into the household economics and stability, among the 381 people who have responded, 45.9% identify as a primary income earner for their household, which is really important. Among them is that 51.6% are married, and all the widower, which is about 16 of them, so that this is their primary income. And we asked them whether this has positive impact for their family, for their livelihood. 94.2% of them said that yes, this actually is really important for us and provides a livelihood for all of us. And this shows that this industry contributes to women-led household, especially economic vulnerability is present. What was quite interesting was that education level, because we understand that education may not be accessible, especially for those that enter the trade in the informal market. What we found was that 64% of the women and 63% of the men only completed elementary educations. That means that they're not qualified for more formal market to get a job. So that's also really important. And 16% of the female have received no education at all. This is an incredible reflection, and that shows that actually one is that the country has inequality when it comes to education sector for women, and a lot of them actually struggle to assess credit, assess formal jobs, and this industry provides an opportunity for women to not only make an income, provide for their family, and also to have opportunities to actually move up in social economic ladder. So now we want to talk about a case study which we did, and thanks for Megapaca for sharing their data with us. We really appreciate it because we focus on the informal markets, and we also wanted to understand the upstream sorting facility and what value add they can provide when it comes to the supply chain. So what we show is that based on this, initial sorting. So how it works is that there's 2 steps in sorting in most sorting facilities, as most of you may know. In the first step, where at Megapaca, about 8.4% is classified as waste during what we call the pre-sorting or the first stage of sorting. Out of the total volume, 68.6% is actually sold through their formal retail outlets, and 23% was distributed as saldos to informal markets. Within those informal markets, 20.4% of the original import volume reached the end consumers, while 2.6% was discarded. In total, when you look at this, is that 89% of the imported product were for reuse, either through direct resale or reselling to the informal markets. And what has been really interesting is that the 8.4% of the textile waste is actually reprocessed again. So what Megapaca did was, through their Novo Fiber plant, is that they are able to remove the zippers, the buttons, the wires inside the clothing, and only generating 0.67 of the waste, which is really minimal. That means they're able to reuse most of the clothing, whether through reuse channel or the recycling channel, to turn it into mattresses and different various items. So this is exemplary because by the end of their supply chain, if you look at the formal supply chain all the way to the informal, their waste total volume, sorry, this is the old slide, is actually about 3.27% with the most updated data. So this is really minimal. It shows that the coordination between sorting and also recycling and working with the informal market is able to reduce the amount of waste in the market. What is our final message here today? I think what's really important to highlight, as all of you understand, that with this trade, there's been a debate around data and waste percentage, as Lisa had mentioned, is that data is really, really important. If you can collect those, if you can share those and be transparent about it, we can actually advise policymakers on what is the reality on the ground. So this highlights there's three main points, is that Guatemala sector actually provide livelihoods for informal market, especially with women, and then those that may not have education. And also what was interesting was that lastly is that has a high reuse rate compared to the US market, because each part of the supply chain, each of the players from sorters to distributors to retailers to vendors and also the sell those traders, they all play an important value extraction to minimize waste. So as you can see that the statistic in the US is only that 20 to 30% of the clothes are actually sold through the retail chain, and the rest of it is going to be exported. So thank you so much for this opportunity again.